The government have agreed to pay NHS consultants an increased amount to end the threat of strikes. The junior doctors and rail workers continue to threaten to down tools. Are the government right to face down unions seeking inflation-busting pay rises? And would an incoming Labour government fold to the likes of the RMT and the British Medical Association? Let's ask the most fearless journalist in Britain, former editor of The Sun newspaper and founder of TalkSport Radio, Kelvin MacKenzie. Kelvin, I think Rishi Sunak deserves some credit for standing his ground with the unions. Would we see the same resolution under Labour?
Absolutely wouldn't. They will throw their hand in at 100 miles an hour. It'll be a shocking aspect of a hugely powerful Labour government. So let's look at it one by one. On the doctors, the consultants, no wonder they settled. They got a 19% pay hike. We'd all settle for 19%. Many would settle for 9%. Or actually, because it's a monopoly and they belong to a trade union, they can charge whatever they like and they can walk out. When the consultants walked out, that was a new low for even for the NHS. So the junior doctors are saying to themselves, right, well, we've now got a sighting shot. We'll give up 35%, but the minimum we'll go for is 19%, and therefore they'll settle for 25%. And Starmer will say, where do I sign? Now we look upon the other aspect of it, which is ASLEF. Now, honestly, I recognise it's a job. I don't believe driving along a straight rail line for 4 days a week. And if you actually threw in their average sick days, they're basically doing about 3 to 3.5 days a week over the year. They get 60,000 for it. They've been offered 65,000. So what do? In each one of the network areas over the country over the next week, they will be on strike. They're going to have an overtime ban for 3 days. They are shockers. The good news is that nobody cares anymore. The ASLEF could stay on strike for 1,000 years. And whereas, in my old editing days, this would be a massive story, the train guys going on strike. They can go on strike forever. It doesn't affect us anymore. Why? Because we have now got something called working from home. And we have computers which even conduct these kinds of conversations, so we don't care about them. So I am very much in favour of doing a whopping, which is actually say to them, I tell you what, now comes the time for testers. We're going to lock you out rather than you locking us out. They are using ordinary, innocent people as their kind of great bulwarks for a pay rise. It's a disgrace. But when Labour come in, I mean, they've got a whole load of ideas in the industrial space, which are going to be a nightmare for small businesses anywhere. For instance, one of them being from the day you start, you are entitled to say whether you want to actually come into the office all the time. Right. This is from day one. Right. And also on day one, you can also say that actually, do you know what? I'm not sure that my mental health can stand going to work at all. Is there something you can accommodate me with? And this is being brought in by the Conservatives, basically, as well as Labour. Honestly, turning up to work these days, it would be easier if somebody just sent round a Securicor van round to your house and handed you the money and said, you don't need to bother to do any work right now. We are a poor country who is becoming poorer because, our productivity is now worse. What about this? Is now worse on an hourly basis than France. So we used to laugh at France about being idle and all the rest of it. Our country is in a very difficult state.
Well, Kelvin, you're absolutely right. We've got £2.6 trillion worth of debt. We've got a deficit, which means day-to-day spending, more is going out than comes in. The next time I hear someone say that Britain is a rich country, I'm going to throw up. It really infuriates me. Now, you mentioned whopping, of course. That was when your former boss, the great Rupert Murdoch, faced down the print unions by relocating to Wapping. Let's talk about the 80s, because you became the editor of The Sun in 1981, when Britain was being held to ransom by the unions, culminating in the miners' strike in 1984. Is there a danger that we could return to those dark days?
Well, it's very difficult to work out what set of workers now can actually have you by the cojones anymore. The miners had our country like that and had won every dispute for literally 30, 40 years. So had the printers, by the way, until they came up against Rupert, in which he said, well, actually, I built another factory down the road, and that's your lot. So that was a great moment for anybody who worked in the print during those days. The greatest moment in their lives was seeing these rather nasty, violent lefties being thrown out of work. It was a joy, an absolute joy. Now, today, that's not the same. Who would have guessed that in the 80s, even the doctors would have gone on strike? Who would have even thought that was possible? So I don't believe that we are going to go through that. However, I do recognize a set of circumstances where if you are the one that's writing the check for the party that's in power to keep them in power, then they are going to have to pay you back in some manner. And it's quite clear that the Prime Minister of the day, Starmer, I'm not sure how long he'll last, by the way, but will want to repay the trade union movement. It will be a nightmare for our country, in which we will have, I'm afraid I'm so old for this, that I can remember Harold Wilson's beer and sandwiches on Number 10, when finally he turned around to Jack Jones and Hugh Scanlon and said, get your tanks off my lawn. And I believe that we're going to face, even although it seems unlikely, we are going to face the fact that trade unions have a much bigger role to play in public life than they have done over the last 14 years.
Now, of course, Kelvin, Labour will argue that the Tories have made a Horlicks of industrial relations over the last couple of years, and that they will work constructively with the unions to give workers the money they deserve. And of course, the nurses, the doctors, the medics, the consultants and the rail workers will argue that they have had real-term pay cuts. But listen, let's get on to another quick story before you go, Kelvin. You went viral this week, and I'm not referring to your robust physical health. You put out a tweet which was seen by over 1 million people, rightly pointing out that Waterloo Station, one of the busiest in the country, was completely empty at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a Friday morning, it's a working day, demonstrating that the country has ground to a halt. It was a brilliant tweet. Now, you got done by Twitter's community censors, who were very pedantic, challenging the suggestion that it's the busiest train station in Europe. That's not the story, is it? The story is that Britain has lost its work ethic.
No, that was obviously put out by some lefty. By the way, they're quite right. They're quite right. The trouble with Waterloo Station is it comes from the southeast, and after COVID, it was #1 in the UK. Before COVID, and then after COVID, because it has so many people commuting to London, it became #2 behind Liverpool Street. So I'm very sorry to those lefties out there. It gave you a victory, which doesn't happen very often, I must be honest with you.
Yeah, but the point stands, doesn't it, Kelvin?
Yeah, the point stands that Waterloo Station, 54 million people a year come into there, and on that particular escalator, there was nobody. There was, right, I've got 2 other photos. It had 1 person on the station on the Jubilee line. Well, you know how busy the Jubilee line through Green Park, Bond Street, my God, everywhere, right? And the other one was the underground ticket to go into the underground from the main station, right? That was completely deserted as well. This is a major issue, and it is a working from home issue, right? And I don't entirely blame the workforce. The workforce, all right, there are idiots like the Office of National Statistics who are now saying they're going to go on strike because they're being told they've got to come back to work for 2 days from literally from the other day. Oh, really? Do take it easy in the civil service. Pace yourself. There are big issues out there, matey, right? But not only that, that is all over the nation. Now, it's one of the reasons why the train drivers can't get a pay rise, because actually there's 2 reasons. One, there's no money anyway. And secondly, what they've discovered is that they haven't got the leverage. So you've got these guys from ASLEF and RMT and giving it all of that. Actually, everybody's saying, really, I'm so sorry, I'm working from home.
Kelvin, love it. The clock's against us. You never take a day off. We'll catch up soon.